even though it was a great opportunity, I was the first woman of color. And I know what it's like being the first of many spaces. I've been in predominantly white spaces, so I knew how to perform or code switch. But I also felt immense pressure, right? And I think oftentimes, at least with me and some of the friends that I've talked with, women, especially Black women in leadership positions, we feel like we have to be the best. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sis Please podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jaretta.
And I'm Satta. Hey everyone.
What's going on? How's your day been?
It's been good. I took the week off. I went and got a facial today, so that was nice. It sort of aligns with one of my priorities for 2023, which is to focus more on self-care and to prioritize self-care. So that's just one of the many ways I'm trying to do that, is to have more me time and to carve out that space and time for myself. And I know a lot of people are focused on self-care. It can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I know for you, it's meant focusing on your mental health a lot.
Yeah, for sure. If 2022 taught us anything, it is just to prioritize yourself because it's hard out here.
So one of the ways you're sort of prioritizing your mental health is that you did something that millions of people have done over the last year and a half, which is quit your job.
Yeah, something that I realized is I'm not going to let anybody, any job break my soul, as Beyonce would say.
So basically, what is the line in the song? You're looking for a new foundation and your own salvation. Found it.
No, I definitely found my new foundation. And it was so funny, right? Because when that song came on, that's the week before I decided to quit my job. And I was like, how Beyonce know this? She a mega millionaire. I'm like, the first two lines, I'm like, man, again, this is a testimony. So a little bit of background. With this particular job, I had started during the height of the pandemic. Well, actually December 2019. And then, the whole world shut down March of 2020. So that was really hard coming into a position 3 months in. And then we were remote. And in this particular job that I worked at was an education nonprofit. So we even had to adapt a lot in terms of figuring out how we were going to service these kids while at the same time working from home. And I think I was in an interesting position as well. So I was in a leadership position, and I think it was tough because I was succeeding over someone who left in the middle of the year. So I inherited a team, and it was very challenging because I think when you're coming in first time, you don't know the people that you've inherited, and you have to build a new foundation. And I think also, too, even though it was a great opportunity, I was the first woman of color. And I know what it's like being the first of many spaces. I've been in predominantly white spaces, so I knew how to perform or code switch. But I also felt immense pressure, right? And I think oftentimes, at least with me and some of the friends that I've talked with, women, especially Black women in leadership positions, we feel like we have to be the best. We have to represent ourselves well because we've primarily lived in spaces where it wasn't built for us or designed for us, essentially. So, and I was the youngest person on the team as well. So a lot to adjust to. And the first year and a half, I'm not going to lie, it was rough. I would say like the first half was characterized by a lot of microaggressions, from all different types of staff, people that I work with directly.
And when you say microaggressions, what exactly were you experiencing?
Yeah, I think when I think about microaggressions, I think about everyday slights. So particularly, there was one person that I was working with who would always give me sass and attitude and was pretty hostile towards me. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and grace. But I couldn't help but think, like, obviously it was because of my race. Feeling scapegoated at times, feeling like the people that I was working with, some of them feeling like I was not knowledgeable or just wanted to micromanage when I was a leader. Like small things like that that really wear on somebody over time. And I think, again, with the height of the pandemic, it was tough. And to be completely honest with you, it was because I think one of the reasons why I started therapy was because I was dealing with such microaggressions on the job.
So, what gave you the courage to quit? Because most people would be in that situation and say, let me just stick it out. Let me wait until I find a new job before I
Mm,
leave this one. So,
yeah.
what was your thought process there?
Yeah, and I want to highlight, like, this was not an overnight thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I had been working there for almost 3 years, and I think in the summer of 2021, looking for jobs in and out. I think another thing that added on to the stress was people were leaving in droves in my department. I already had a small department to begin with, and when you're the boss, you have to fulfill in a lot of roles on top of your own job. So I think people leaving every couple of months heightened my anxiety in a way that never happened before. And, I felt like there was 3 different periods where I was just like, oh, this is my wit's end. And it was like, God was like, I'm going to stretch you out a little bit more. And I'm like, oh, I'm tired. And then towards the end of me leaving my job, I decided, like, I can't do this anymore. So I think it was just me being extremely exhausted, having panic attacks when I would go to work, just feeling like really anxious and burnt out and disoriented. And I've never felt that way before. And I'm speaking someone now, like, being out of that situation, I was like, oh no, your body is like literally shutting down on you. And if you keep going, you don't know what's gonna happen. So I was just like, and I was doing all the things, right? Like, I was going to therapy, I was praying, I was seeking out mentorship from white women and black women, like whether they were my same age or older black women. What else was I doing? I was even seeking out help, right? So, like, talking to my leadership about, yo, like, I'm really struggling with certain things. Can you help, like, fill in my plate? So I felt like I had exhausted every option,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just at my wit's end. And I'm like, listen, it's cool to be a boss, but I will not ever be a boss, a girl boss, for the sake of my mental health. That's not going to happen. I think there's a lot of, oh, girl boss, and be that girl. And it's just like, listen, not at the expense of my mental health, because I feel like if I'm not right, then nothing's right. And I don't care how hard that I work. I just felt an urging from the Lord of, it's time for you to leave. Now, I am someone, and especially given before I got this job, I was unemployed for 6 months, had graduated from grad school. So I also know what it's like to lose your job and be without work. So
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking in my head, like, shoot, like, God, like, this is a step. Like, how are you going to provide for me?
So, were you scared at all? Because, as you know, first generation kids of African immigrants, there's often this scarcity mindset and a focus on financial and job security. You'll hear people say, what, are you crazy? You're going to leave your job without having a new one? How are you going to pay your bills? That sort of.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, because I thought about it for a long, long time. And I had conversations even with mom about considering it. And she was like, no, 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 wait, wait. Um, and again, I'm someone, like, I'm not a stranger to hard work. I think I'm a dope worker. I think people that I've worked with know, like, my work ethic. So it wasn't a matter of me not wanting to work, but at what point was it enough?
Yeah.
It
But
was
I
just
think you
hard.
also had, a safety net in the sense that we talk about the great resignation, and the stats are that there are like two open jobs for every one worker. So it's not like you quit in the middle of like the great recession
Yeah,
where it's
yeah,
like, it's like, how am I going to find a job? Because I've had, sort of the opposite experience when, I got laid off during the Great Recession. And then 5 years later, I was laid off again. So
yeah,
job security has always been, I feel like, in flux for me. So the idea of quitting a job, you know, probably would have never crossed my mind in that context when you're
yeah.
just begging and praying and hoping to get a job, especially during that period. I think I was unemployed for 7 months, the
Yeah,
first
that's
time.
tough. And it weighs on you too. Like I even remember at that time, 2019, like I would have chronic headaches because it's like, shoot, like you're doing all the things. Like I'm sure you're applying to many
And
jobs.
this is before, to clarify, this is before you found the job that you were at for 3 years, right? This is when you were looking for a job. What outside of
Yeah, grad
after
school.
grad
Yeah.
school? Yeah.
Yeah. So after grad school, unemployed for 6 months and then found this job that we're talking about now that I left. And it's so interesting how things work. But I think I am someone who tends to be anxiety driven, fear driven. But
Hmm.
again, just hearing like an urging for the Lord of like, I got you. You can, it's okay. And I'll never forget, like, when I had that conversation with my boss about I'm leaving, I felt at peace about it.
Yeah.
Like, I felt at peace about it, which indicated to me, like, I made the right decision for
And your
myself.
body will tell you when what you're doing is right or wrong. Like you'll have like a physical reaction to certain things. Like, when you think about when it's Monday morning, you're thinking about going to work and you're like, just have this ball in the pit of your stomach, or,
And
and but then when you make a decision to bless and release and say, you know what, I can't do this anymore, your body reacts to that too. And you're like, your mind and your body will tell you when you're making the right decision for yourself.
yeah, and I think it's really important for everybody to show up for themselves in the best way that they know how. And I just wanted to highlight, despite all the stress that I was going through, I think I managed it in the best way. Like I remember my performance review and my boss at the time, same age as me, and he was like, "You're killing it. You're doing a great job despite everything." And I think that also just speaks to how I feel like a lot of Black women in the workplace go above and beyond when it comes to our workplaces, but sometimes not feeling respected the
Or
way that
value.
in the way that we should. I
Mhm.
remember just even talking to one of my friends just a couple of weeks ago, and she said something along the lines of, "This is what I'm dealing with at work," and also feeling like she wanted to leave.
Mhm.
And
So was she dealing with the same thing, like microaggressions,
oh
feeling
yeah, and she had
undervalued,
yeah,
undermined?
and she had been there for 5 years, and there was a
Mhm.
certain incident that happened where folks were talking over her, and she felt silence, but decided to kind of speak up and was just like, "Well, I guess like I'm not necessary in this conversation." And she was like, "Oh, all my colleagues were just like, oh, are you okay? Da 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 da." And she's like, "I feel bad that I spoke up." I'm like, "No, don't feel bad." And she was just like,
Yeah,
"This has been a,"
everybody has a breaking point, you
and
know.
then that's exactly what I was going to say, because I'm like, best believe, I'm not gonna lie, there are certain people who be doing the most at work. And I would never forget to like my last day of work, because it was bittersweet and sad. Like I knew I was proud of myself for making this decision. My first boss that hired me, gave me a big hug, gave me a card. They had a party for me the day before, and she was like, "Thank you for making this organization a better place, like challenging us when needed, in terms of like how our organization can think more critically about diversity and inclusion, especially when we're
Mhm.
serving Black and Brown youth." And then she said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I was like, "Sure." And she was just like, "Would you say like during the latter half of you working here, did you feel like better?" And I know what she was alluding to, because like during the second half of me working there was more senior leadership of color that looked like me. And I was like, "Yeah,
Mm.
I think we've done a good job of doing that." And she was like, "I don't want people to code switch at work," which
Wait,
I
she
understand.
she said to you she doesn't want people to code switch at work.
Yes, now let me explain.
Okay.
Hearing that, I'm like, I get the sentiment. But in my head, I'm like, there are real consequences when it comes to Black people, folks
Like
of
bringing your full
full
blackness
self.
to the workplace, showing up
Exactly.
as your full self, quote unquote.
Ex-
Like
it,
some people aren't ready for that.
they're not. And I will never forget, I saw a TikTok last year where it was just like, I can't be going out speaking my nigga mind in this non-nigga place for you non-niggas. I would get fired
Mm.
so mother, and it was so true because, like you said, you there's risk to really being your full, true, authentic self. I was just even reading Michelle Obama's like "The Light We Carry,"
Oh, I need to
and
start that. Yeah.
yeah, and she talks about that too, like when she was a lawyer and how she had worked with a select few of black women, and she was just like, well, we're not going to let you fail, essentially, because if you mess up, then we all mess up, and that looks bad on us.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of some research that I found recently of black women in the workplace and how they deal with stress and yeah, how they
How
deal
they
with
cope.
stress. Yeah,
Hmm.
how they deal with stress and how they cope. Because I think oftentimes when it comes to black women, we face a double whammy, right? Being black, but also like our gender and how that,
Racism and sexism.
yeah, essentially. So, like in the study, it talks about a couple of things, like the black women that they interviewed. I think it was like 168, saying certain themes came up about, again, defending one's race and lack of mentorship. Well, luckily
Hmm.
for Michelle Obama, like she did have those black women that I hope that she leaned on. But at the same time, I think especially when it comes to a lot of folks of color in these high level positions, there is not a lack of mentorship. And I even think about me first off, like when I had my boss who was well intentioned, but she, again, she did the best that she could, but it wasn't me until me telling her certain things were happening
Yeah.
that she was like, "Oh, I didn't know."
Yeah, we
So,
all have blind spots, but especially when you're part of sort of the majority culture, you don't necessarily see things from the view of a marginalized person unless
yeah,
you have that person sitting in that space with the seat at the table to point this out. Like, no, this isn't right. This is very problematic, and here's why.
exactly.
Um,
And yeah, and there would be certain times in the office where people were out of pocket and I would tell her, because again, I can't be my negative self at work. So, but also too, the stereotypes that's associated with it, like, oh,
like, oh, angry black
angry
woman.
black woman, because that also, I wouldn't say like was my full experience at work, but there was one person in particular that tried to paint me that way, and it's just like, I think you have to see it from my perspective as well. Like, you come into my office and it's no hello, it's like what you need, giving me
Yeah,
attitude, like, how do you expect me to react to that? And like, I should
yeah,
just be at your beck and call because you need something.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And to that point, it often feels like in a traditional workplace setting, we're not allowed to show our full humanity because when we do, like, people are angry, we're allowed to be angry. White women are angry, white men are angry, black men are angry, black women are angry. There are moments in the workplace when you're working with other people that try you. People try you all the time.
All the
And so
time.
and so to be viewed as angry when that is just a natural human emotion, but you can't display that, you have to shut off that part of your humanity in
Like,
a way
it's tough.
is upsetting and it's tough and it leads to this double consciousness, this code switching, this you're
Yeah,
always aware there's what is actually going on in the room when you're sitting there and what is going on in your head and how you're trying to navigate both of those things
all the time.
simultaneously, and it's mentally exhausting. And
Yeah,
I don't think people understand what it's like to deal with that unless you're like a person of color, unless you're black and you're a
yeah,
woman in the
yeah,
workplace, so that, I
yeah.
mean, that is tough, and that's one of the reasons why I have remained self-employed. It's when I became self-employed not because of microaggressions in the workplace, that that's just part of the deal, but I was laid off twice, as I said before. After the second layoff, which was in 2014, I just kind of fell into freelancing and being self-employed. But what happened by accident eventually became a choice because of the
Mm.
flexibility, how it allowed me to control my own time, but it also protected me in a way from microaggressions that I had experienced in the past in the workplace.
Yeah.
Like, I remember one year I got a performance review, and we had this process where you do like kind of like blind peer reviews, so people give blind feedback, but then you also get feedback from your boss. And one of the comments in my performance review, she called me dismissive and disdainful. Like, she gave positive comments about, my contributions to the team, but sometimes Satta can be dismissive and disdainful. And I remember talking to my mentor about it, who was also a woman of color, an Asian woman who was working there at the time as a consultant for our organization. I told her what was in my performance review, and she said to me, "You need to go to HR and have that removed." And now, all these years later, looking back, I realized what she was basically hinting at to me was like, what she put in your review is not right. And she's basically calling you an angry Black woman. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Now I realize that. But being self employed, I don't deal with that as much. Although I did have a funny moment with a client once. I was on a work trip, a client trip a few years ago. And I usually wear my hair in faux locks or braids or whatever. I have faux locks in this time. And she was just so, I don't want to say befuddled and bewildered, but she was so interested in my hair, and she just touched it without asking me. And no, no, for me, I'm not gonna go put my hand in another grown person's head. I'm not gonna do
Like
that.
you some type of chia pet.
Your pet, or we're at a petting zoo or something. And it was, well, I try to give people grace. It was well intentioned. She was like, "Oh, your hair's so nice. It's so cool." That's what they say. It's so cool. But like, in what
Ethnic.
she didn't say that, but in what setting is that okay to just kind of violate another person's space like that? But my experience isn't unique. Black women have had this happen to them several times in the workplace. Talk about their hair, people touching their hair, asking
Yeah.
questions, and it's just this curiosity. It's
City,
like,
like, ooh, like what
it's
is that?
strange.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember one time actually, I mean, I usually have my hair like this, but I did rock some
And
braids.
what's like this for, because people are listening, not seeing.
Yes, straight hair, weave, wigs,
Wigs,
you know.
everything.
Yes, I like to be glammed, especially now that I work from home.
Mhm.
But yeah, I remember wearing braids one time, and this same person that would give me a lot of problems would be like, he just kept looking at my hair. He's like, oh. And I was like,
So
what, you
you
know,
change your hair because you normally wear it like straight
straight.
weaves, wigs,
It's
whatever,
like,
and
yeah,
you happen to be wearing braids, and he was staring at you
yeah. And
noticed
he
him
was,
staring at your head.
yeah. And he was just like, oh, and you got a heart shape. And
What does
then,
that mean? I'm confused. What
cause
is a heart shape?
I had like one of those lover girl braids from Drake, like with the heart. I don't know. I have to just,
Was it like cornrows or something?
it was in cornrows. It was like my birthday hair. It was in
it
cornrows. I
was your birth.
had
It was your birthday hair.
yes,
Uh-huh.
my birthday hair. I had like the lemonade braids. Yes, the
Okay.
lemonade
Okay.
braids. But then
Uh-huh.
they like she did a heart design anyway. So, you know, he just started looking at me and he was like, well, you know, I'm not going to say what I need to, I want to say.
Go ahead. Just it's the podcast.
No, he said, I'm not going to say what I want to say. Like
Oh, that's
basically,
what. Wait, that's what he said.
yeah.
Oh, oh wow. So he
So,
was probably going to make a negative comment about your hair,
yeah.
and
And
he decided he thought twice and was like, "Let me keep this to myself."
exactly, because we've had run ins before. And not even just with him. And I don't even want to be disrespectful, but I'm not going to lie. I have a lot of good white friends, but I've also seen the white women tears. And sometimes it catches me off guard, but it's also really tough, right? Because I feel like certain people who are white have certain privileges that, again, say a marginalized person would never do at work in terms
Like,
of,
they get to show the full breadth of their
oh yeah,
humanity without it being held against them later
they
on,
can be their
potentially.
full, true, authentic selves. They can cry, they can storm out, they can challenge, but let
Hmm.
me do it. You know, it's cool when they do it. It's a problem when I do it. So no, it's frustrating at
Yeah,
times.
and I completely agree with that, because I felt like in that dismissive and disdainful review, I felt like there were other people within our organization who
Did the most.
maybe that description would have applied to more so than me, who
Mm.
could be very dismissive of other people, or not kowtow to authority, and that was and challenge authority, and that was looked at as an asset, or as, just a personality trait that was accepted. Because when you call someone put in a performance review, like dismissive is one thing, disdainful, if you look up the meaning of that word, which sort of knew what it meant, but I really had to look it up. That word means hateful. That is a
Yeah.
strong ass word to put in a performance review, to say someone is dismissive and hateful
Yeah,
towards their colleagues,
it's
you know?
really, and it doesn't look good as well. And I just wanted to hear from you, like in the corporations that you did work for,
Hmm.
before returning to being self-employed, like were there any other people of color that you found solidarity with? Because I think that's super important.
Yeah.
But
Definitely, and but there weren't a lot of us, as you can imagine, because the higher up you ascend, or in even in certain industries, and I worked in the media industry, which is notoriously, minorities are underrepresented. So you sort of develop a clique or a family. You have this shared understanding and mutual experience, because I had another colleague who was a black colleague, more of a senior manager on a separate team. And during this performance review process, someone put in his review, again, we had some blind peer reviews as part of the process, along reviews from our boss, the people who we directly reported to. And in one of his reviews, someone called him lackadaisical, which, again, you look up the meaning of that word, means lazy.
yeah, and
Like,
it's
how can
just
you
like,
put that in someone's performance review? And honestly, we think that it was the same person who,
yeah,
like, was mine and his. So
yeah, it's bold, and then it's tough too, because when you experience these things, I can see why your former colleague, even some of my friends, where it's just like, shoot, do I really want to bring this up?
yeah,
Because you
you
don't
can
want
make
to
it worse
be,
for yourself.
you can make it worse for yourself, but you also, I know some people get so tired, like, oh, why do people of color, black people, always have to talk about race? Because it's that is a huge part of what we experience on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
So I think for us to speak up and stand out is important. I think it's also interesting too, because I know you've experienced this and seen this. I know you've been working remotely and for yourself, but I know when 2020, with the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, everybody wanted to put Black Lives Matter in their organizations. We stand with the black community.
The performative allyship.
Exactly. But
Hmm.
to me, don't even say, hey, I mean, don't even put that, oh, we stand with the black community, when you treat the folks that work for you in equitable ways, and you're not looking to self reflect and how to make that like a better experience for marginalized folks, because the world is changing. And I think in order to have a meaningful experience in the workplace, like people are going to have to be accepting of all, no matter what you identify as, what your race is, because I mean, we spend the majority of our time at work. So adding on microaggressions, violent attacks on performance reviews doesn't make it helpful. And I think, I ain't gonna lie, like, I feel like some people are emboldened to say some stuff.
I have a question for you. So you decided to make this change. You did. Beyonce told you to quit your job. So
So I did.
you went ahead. You wouldn't let them break your soul,
They wouldn't.
and you found a new job. So,
Mm.
and now this job is 100% remote.
For
Which
the most part,
whereas your other one, or it was mostly remote, whereas your other one wasn't.
wasn't.
But do you think remote work protects you in a way, or even protects us as black women in a way, from some of the microaggressions we typically experience in the workplace?
Oh yes, and I can see why. Like once the pandemic loosened up, a lot of folks were like, "Shoot, I like the flexibility. I like working from home, and I don't have to deal with this nonsense bull jive that I would usually experience if I was in the office." So I would say that definitely shielded me. I will say something that I'm learning in this new job that's a little bit tough, because it's a whole different new position, and I'm a hard worker. And I feel like this season has definitely taught me how to slow down And
Not that hustle culture
culture, yeah.
mentality.
Yeah, and my therapist straight up was just like, you need to decolonize your mind from
Decolonize your mind. I
from
mean,
working too hard.
maybe we should save that for another day and another podcast topic, but I'm decolonize your mind. I really like that phrase. What exactly does she mean by that?
Just in terms of, because also one thing too is like she's African as well, so she can
Yeah,
relate.
she's also West African, yeah.
Yeah, so she's like, I hearing about what you talk about with your family and also experiencing this in your own in her own life about this, again, like you said, hustle culture and the need to work and overwork, where we don't even have the time to relax
Mhm.
and really think and pursue the things that we want to do outside of work. Like, I even think about our family members where they
Yeah,
doing doubles on doubles.
they live to work.
Yes, and it's like, is that sustainable? Like,
No.
so I think that's what she meant by decolonizing it, of just like taking a break. And in some ways, like, I felt bad for taking a little bit of a break, because I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, I'm doing my work, but I feel like I could be doing more. I think it's just been an interesting period of me slowing down.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to rest in order to go, like you have to go slow in order to go fast, if that makes any sense. You know, you can't be going 100 miles an hour because you're going to run out of gas, you're going to run out of steam, and that just leads to burnout, anxiety, stress,
Hmm.
mental anguish.
Yeah, and look at God though, because I forgot to mention, I was applying to jobs during the time of me quitting my job as
Mhm.
well. So the first day of me being unemployed at that job is when I got a call from my current job saying, "Hey, we really liked you. You didn't get the position, but we want to offer you and create a position for you."
Mhm.
So again, I believe in Jesus Christ. And but also I think it's also just a testament to his faithfulness, but then also me listening to him in my gut, because I had I not been in that situation, or had I not took the leap, I wouldn't be in a position where I am now. And it's interesting because since I had left that job, I don't have anxiety. I'm not having panic
Yeah, I mean, it was
attacks.
directly related to being in
Exactly.
that role. And I also think what's important to sort of highlight or discuss here is that you were in a role where you were director level, so you had people reporting to you. And in this new role you're in, you're more of an individual contributor. And I
Yeah.
think that's sometimes there's so much pressure to just ascend up the ladder and keep going and going. And not everybody's meant to be a boss, and not everybody wants to be a boss,
And
or it's
that's
not,
fine.
yeah, and it's not maybe the right role at that point in time in your career for you to do. Like, people have asked me all the time, because I've been self-employed for so long, "Oh, do you want to grow into an agency and hire employees and have people work under you?" No, no, no. Like, I do
No, no,
not
no.
want that stress. Like, I like my consultant model that I'm working within, because it allows me to have the kind of work life balance and minimize that I need and minimize my stress. But I feel like there's so much focus
On
in,
like, be a boss,
especially
hustle
within
culture,
our generation, millennials, being a boss bitch, this boss,
boss
that boss.
babe.
I don't want to be a boss
Not
like
not
that.
not at the sake of my
N-
mental health,
Not at
never.
the expense of my mental health. Exactly.
I think another thing that added to my stress was, on top of everything that I was feeling, it's tough being the boss when people are leaving. And again, with this first pressure that I had of, I am the first person of color, woman of color, black woman to work in this organization as a senior leader, and then people are leaving. Granted, people were leaving for their own reasons, right? Like, it wasn't a good fit,
Yeah, I mean,
or
it's a great resignation. They can quit a job and get another one tomorrow. So I'm sure
exactly.
that was part of it.
But it was stressful for me, because I'm like, dang, I want to quit. I was, I want to
Yeah.
quit. I want
Oh
to quit,
God,
and yet
that's
I
so
can't.
funny. I can't quit because everybody else is quitting.
I'm like, shit. Like, I'm happy for you, but it's hard because now I'm gonna have to, like.
You're like the last woman standing.
Yeah, I remember, like, there was one one woman I was working with who just like left, and I was just like,
Take me with you. Take
yes,
me with you.
you know, um, but yeah, like with all these people leaving, I also had this thing in the back of my head, and it was never explicitly said, but you never know, just like that paranoia of, oh my God, they're leaving. Look at the under this black woman's leadership, and they're leaving, and now they
Mm-hmm.
don't have a talk with her, and that wasn't helpful for me either. But I never
Mm-hmm.
had that feeling. But I think it's just again this added pressure to perform and be the
Yeah.
best and do the best that you can,
Mm-hmm.
because it was tough, and I've had people that were under me who like undermined the hell out of me. Like had
Mm-hmm.
told one of my bosses, and I'll never forget this too. Like I had asked a particular person that was leaving, like, hey, I know we've had a rocky patch in the start, but how do you feel like I need to improve on for the next team? And she said, nothing. And then I have a conversation with my boss, and she was just like, I feel like Jaretta wasn't advocating for the team. It's like, what? I'm asking you. For me, I think one thing I can say about myself is I always want to self improve, and I always want to be better, because leadership
Mm-hmm.
isn't for everyone. But if I'm in this position, I want to be an asset to the people that I'm working with, and I'm supposed to be representing. So to me, I felt like it was an affront that you're like, oh, she didn't advocate for the team. But my boss was like, well, she was like, you weren't throwing your colleagues under the bus, essentially, about
Mm-hmm.
like mistakes being made in the workplace. And she was like, you were being professional, and you weren't going to be like, oh, well, talk to the higher ups.
Mm-hmm.
And I think but I think the first half of me working there was very isolating about, just being the only. And also me overexerting myself, not only in the job, but also to create sustainable relationships as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
people already have these preconceived notions of who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be tough. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until me, taking a humble step and saying, hey, let me exhaust every single option and try to build these relationships with people, even though I'm being disrespected as hell right now. And
Mm-hmm.
it works some, but I think again, it's like, damn, why do we have to try so hard? Why can't I just exist the way that I am, like without being challenged and thrown under the bus? Uh,
So what's your advice for someone else who's listening who may be in a similar situation, contemplating quitting their job, especially like a young millennial woman of color like yourself?
I would say if you feel comfortable advocating for yourself, and I think sometimes it takes time. I mean, I will say with this last job that I work with, like I'm still cordial with my boss. I grabbed coffee with some folks that I work with closely, but I think it does help to have some allies on your team, on your corner. So as you're building a relationship, I would say take time to build relationships with your higher ups, so that way when concerns do happen, you can voice them up in a concise manner. Workplaces have to be psychologically safe for employees for them to speak up. So I think that's one way. And I think also too, seeking mentorship. Like I mentioned in that study, a lot of Black women highlighted that it's the lack of mentorship that also creates them feeling isolated. But again, Black women,
Mm-hmm.
we usually find a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, go to your local business association. And I'm sure like there's a lot of stuff
Or a
in Rhode Island.
professional organization for
Yeah.
your
Yeah. Professional
specific industry.
yeah, and seek out mentorship. Like, so at my last job, I was like, hey, it'd be really helpful if I had a mentor of color. Like, do you know anybody in this space that could be of service? And I still talk to them to this day. And there's also another woman that I had met at the latter part of me leaving my job. And she, again, I still talk to her to this day. Like, I had a nice, real conversation with her as I was leaving my job. And she was like, I'm in full support of it. Took me out to go get a massage. That was great, So it's great to have people, older people who have a little bit more experience than you to give you sage advice, but then also have your back. So I would say like those are the two things that are important. How about you?
And if all else fails, just quit.
I mean that's true too, because I think what kept me up for so long was what happened in 2019, also seeing your experience as well. Like, I was younger, I was in high school, but like it's a tough thing. And granted, like, I mean, you didn't have kids at the time, but again, it's stressful when you need to make a living and it doesn't, things aren't panning out. So like I understand, like, people got to eat. So, but I think at the end of the day, it all works itself out. And that's something that my friends were telling me as well. Like, it
Mhm.
all works itself out,
Yeah.
because if I didn't take that step, I don't know where I would be. So I have a question to ask you, because I waited a while to tell you, honestly, that I was
Okay.
thinking about this. But what was your reaction and your honest reaction? Because I know you weren't totally on board.
I don't. Uh, I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, I didn't have a problem with you leaving your job because I felt like you should have left. Honestly, if we're being completely candid, I didn't know if that role was the right role for you out of grad school, having to manage people. Because I think you're strongest when you're an individual contributor, and just not just that. I just know the stress that comes with managing people.
Yeah, it's
Like
just tough.
someone once described, I was reading this comment on a New York Times story before, and the guy was like saying, I'm so glad I'm retired because managing people was like running an adult daycare. And that's exactly
That's
what
what
it
it
is.
is.
So yeah, so for those reasons, I was just like, I don't think this is the right fit. So I didn't have a problem with you quitting. My issue was quitting without having another job lined up, because how are you going to pay them student loans? How are you going to pay your bills?
Yeah,
That kind of thing.
yeah,
So I feel like I was like, does she have a plan? Because it wasn't 100% clear to me what the plan was. And it seemed like you were going by faith and it worked out. Not that you weren't applying to jobs and stuff,
yeah. I was
but
applying to many jobs.
yeah, but you were going by faith and it worked out. But yeah, I was concerned, as I felt, it felt like I was taking on that African mom mentality. It's like, oh, so what now? You gonna quit your job
Yeah,
without another job? Where do they do that at? That kind of thing. But I think, it, considering the environment in which you chose to make this decision, in terms of it's a very strong job market. I knew you would eventually find a job. It was just a matter of
of
when.
time. Yeah,
Now, I would say go in 2023. I don't know if people can be doing that. If we're headed toward a recession, you got to think twice before you make this kind of leap. So,
yeah. I mean, again, I think it always works itself out. It
mhm,
always does, and
yeah.
I'm just really thankful that I'm in this space where I feel much better and I feel lighter. Like, again, like I said, I went to coffee with some of my old colleagues, and they were going to talk about like the stresses of the job. And I'm like, I'm glad I ain't working there no more.
I think that's a good note to end on.